quite a lot of research on all of the, well, I'm going to call them big players, to see what kind of trends we are to be expected in 2022. So Ryan and I will have the pleasure of walking you through the reality of the distortion field, as I like to call it. We are all PMO professionals. We all know how difficult it is being sometimes a toothless tiger with lots of responsibility but very little power. So this time around, we will ask you quite a few of polling questions and hope that we can also evoke a couple of nice conversations. So with all of that being said, I'm going to hand over for that first part to Mr. Ryan. Ryan, over to you.
Hello, everybody. I am Ryan. Happy Friday. So what I'm going to do is take you through what's behind that distortion field. We're going to look behind the curtain a little bit. I'm going to get Mark to actually do the next slide for me, because he's sharing the slides. So first of all, you may have, if you have attended these before, heard us talk about how long PMOs last. And I've often had a statistic that it's about 2-ish years. So APM has actually come out with a survey saying that 50% of PMOs close within 3 years. So this is a reality. This is sort of like, are you a little house cat or are you a tiger, and have you got teeth if you're that tiger, and can you last longer? Now, if you do last longer, do you succeed? So what Gartner is saying is that half of PMO implementations actually fail. So that PMO ends up being the house cat sleeping on the couch and not actually able to do anything. Okay, so this is a bit of a problem. Now, where those PMOs are succeeding, it's all well and fine, the PMO is very happy, but their purpose, are their projects succeeding? So Standish, who's for decades been giving us the chaos report, is saying that only 1/3 of projects are actually being successfully completed. If you think about it, that is not good. Your little house cat is not healthy, if this is the truth, okay?
And it would also be a question of, what does successfully completed mean, Yep. Is it on time and on budget these days, or are we actually talking about the final outcome of a project? Yeah.
And that is actually a very, if you could just do the next one as well, that's a very important thing Marcus said there. It's about the perception. You may think all my projects are on time and on budget. However, 68% of people are called stakeholders, so the people judging you around that PMO, according to Gartner, are saying, well, you're too bureaucratic. And then IBM is saying that, well, 40% of those projects, yeah, sure, they're on time, they're on budget, you can fill all the paperwork in, but only 40% actually met the goals. So the true value is coming through only 40% of projects. And there's a good amount of people in the organization who are seeing you, their perception of you, that reality, the distortion field is not great. So why is this happening? Why is PMO life difficult? Well, first of all, politics, culture. One of the more recent sessions we did survey, and one of the outstanding, the leading causes of these things failing from you is just that you have too many bosses, too many cooks in the kitchen, too many differing goals, too much politics. Well, related to that is that there's no strong, clear executive leadership. It's about that top-down, everyone marching to the same beat, okay? In a situation where you do not have the executive leadership, you're going to end up in an organization where no one can quite agree on the goals. No one can quite agree on how we manage projects. So as a result, you can't quite trust anything. So we can't quite make decisions. Okay, so everything.
In particular now with waterfall and agile and hybrid and wedgile and lean, they all have their purposes. Trying to bring them all under one blanket is actually the challenging part here.
Yeah, and then let's say you do manage to get them under one blanket, either successfully or not. You're in an environment, and we've seen it through COVID, and year by year it's getting worse or better, depending on which way you look at it, but priorities change. The businesses need to react. If you are trying to force everyone through waterfall, that's going to be hard to do. If you've got a mix of them, can you have that mix successfully stay mixed and flex as your priorities change? Now, let's say you do get all that right, you still have a problem in that why are you doing this in the first place? It's about change management. It's about actually getting the organization to take on your change and get those outcomes. And significant number of organizations are just underestimating the effort involved in that. And making that worse is that their existing processes and the software that enables their processes is just from years ago. It's really something from the old days, and it just cannot flex accordingly. Okay, so go to the next slide, please. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through some information through this session, starting with Gartner. So I'll start with Gartner. Mark will then continue with the Agile PMO and the ARPM. And we're going to look at their survey for 2021. So the beginning of 2021, they've come out with what they think the state or what the future needs to actually be. This is going to be your chance to look at it and think, how are we actually doing here? So what you did see on the previous slide that we were on for a little while is a traditional maturity model where we go through our typical 5 phases. We've all seen it. Maturity models always have 5 phases. Now, we've basically started, most of us, in sort of level 1, reactive. We form a PMO into level 2, and we start getting towards thinking about aligning with strategy. But here's the tipping point. Okay, this is where things start moving away. It gets maybe a bit too complicated, but we don't quite make it over to actually look at value across the entire organization, because that's what level 3 and 4 is all about, is can we bring everything together, not just be that PMO that fills spreadsheets in and tracks timesheets, but let's rather track benefits. Let's start adapting with the organization's strategic goals. And here is now a fresh way of looking at this model. And this is the Gartner approach. So what you can see here is 3 phases through the evolution. First of all, directive, so the old school PMO. Moving towards what we really need, adaptive project management, and then getting to that nirvana is dynamic. From previous sessions, you would have heard us talk about PMOs, EPMOs, and strategic PMOs. These are really the 3 stages that we go through. So looking at what's happening with the directive PMO. Directive PMO is old school. They are focusing on command and control. They are focusing on, without realizing it, bureaucracy. They are, you will do it this way, no matter whether you want to or not. The problem with it is the world's changing. Businesses have a certain time at which they can achieve a certain value. If you are holding them back, they perceive you not as being that tiger. Okay, so we move forward. We want to move away from directive and we want to become adaptive. Now, an adaptive PMO exists in an organization where business leaders need that continuous delivery. They need faster responses. They need you to adapt and flex as the approach actually changes. And they start looking at the perception of that directive turns a bit sour, like you're bureaucratic, don't really like this anymore. The PMO is all about setting up continuous delivery, not just big projects. It's continuous delivery that encompasses the entire organization to meeting their strategic goals. So therefore it becomes more agile-like, and the approaches are around getting high levels of collaboration and engagement to get work done as opposed to just a few projects. That builds the base that gets you to where you really need to be, which is dynamic. Now, a dynamic PMO is strategic. It's about value. So it's not focused on the project methodology and filling in forms and making sure you are governed through the workflow. This stuff by this stage isn't just happening. It's embedded into the systems. The dynamic PMO is focusing on what are the strategic goals? How can we support organizations in coming up with those goals? And how can we help them realize value? Okay, they are a partner to the people who need to achieve value, as opposed to just an administrative function anymore, which is the old directive approach. And to do it, those PMO leaders need to change and start closing the gaps to move to that future state. And that future state, I'm going to let you just kind of, I'm not going to read through all this, I'll let you read a little bit, and I'm going to open this up to you, okay? So what we've shown you here is Gartner's approach, or Gartner's view of the world, which is something that Sensei is very much aligned with. So you're either directive, or you're adaptive, or you're dynamic. These slides essentially are a year old. So beginning of 2021, they came out. I'm going to open it up for to the chat here. Where do you guys think you are? Are there any organizations that are definitely in that directive level? Are there any of you that have moved into adaptive? And anyone dynamic and really focusing on becoming agents of change, strategic change within an organization? And how's it gone? If you had to fill in those recommendations, what would you say? You want to move from adaptive to directive, adaptive, dynamic. What are the things you need to do? So from our point of view, it's really about the strategic partnership with the business leaders and starting there. So you exist for a reason, for their reason, as opposed to your reason, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see from the audience's perspective. Do you still see yourself as more of a gatekeeper of of stage gates, that sort of traditional governance path? Or are you starting to partner with all of the different areas of your business to understand what their high value is? Yeah, it would be interesting to hear your thoughts. Any feedback?
So feel free to unmute yourself and talk, or just type it into the chat.
All right. Thank you, Simon. I often find the conversation around the PMO charter business case KPI for success as a way to engage executives. Yeah, look, I couldn't agree more, Simon. Isn't it interesting? I mean, ultimately, a PMO glues really the strategy and the execution of that strategy through projects. And by enabling real KPIs that executives understand, I can also see that this really starts to then be a more engaging partnership path where executives are actually reliant on the information, because ultimately, as a PMO, we are trying not only to outline what the past has been, so the status report. What we actually try to do is outline what the future is going to look like and which direction we need to go, or whether we need to amend our execution projects based on on accomplishing the strategic themes and the strategic goals of an organization. I know you guys are all having lunch, and I'm sure you're eating halfway through, so I'm just going to say that's the reason why you don't discuss it with us. Simon, thank you so much for for engaging it. But any other feedback would be greatly appreciated.
Hey, Mark, it's Tom Davenport here.
Hey, Tom.
Nice to see you again.
Lovely to see you.
I'm just going to interject my point from the side, which was, it was interesting to see that you're still calling it PMO, because I had an almost adverse reaction to PMO, very much in that directive, like, ooh, you're going to make me do stuff and make me fill out forms. And has there been any thought about, possibly rebranding the concept of it? Because it's very different, like dynamic versus, and I think that's where it needs to be, because the sort of business I work in, I see a lot of companies trying to accomplish strategic things, and they're all mediocre.
I couldn't agree more, Tom. Yeah, that negative connotation of the term PMO, meaning heavy, is actually almost ingrained in the DNA. So I have seen organization calling it VMO, for Value Management Office, which I thought was very appropriate, because that really outlines what they ultimately want to achieve, the value of it. Then, of course, the strategic PMO, what do they call them, Ryan? SMO, I think, or AMO, SRO. Yeah, there we go. Thank you, Simon. So yeah, it is. It's a great question, Tom, and maybe a rebranding will already, lighten up. And as part of that change to partnership to my departments, that would be a good opportunity to rebrand. Yeah.
Comment. I was just going to say that we've talked a lot about this, and I think we're very aligned on it. But I found myself just coming back to that, like bad feeling about it. Anyway, yeah. I'll let you guys go.
No, thank you very much, Tom. That's much appreciated.
Caroline's actually put into the chat there, just it's a huge culture change is needed. And Caroline, you're exactly right. And it's great to hear that you guys are transitioning. The whole, and actually others come up with reform and transform program office. I like that. Reform and transform into the future. This really is about how you start evolving forward. Okay, Mark,
I would even almost ask the question whether office is the appropriate term. I wonder whether it should be something like, I don't know, transformation hub, or something.
I think
maybe a session, maybe a suggestion for next session actually.
It could be. If you think about what Gartner is saying around this, one of the differentiators from the future to the old PMO is that they are hubs of excellence. The second is that they are partnering with everyone around work generally. So it's a web. As opposed to being just centralized office that's in a corner somewhere, the PMO is essentially decentralized to a large extent. And I think that's part of getting away from the office word. Okay, so how do we actually get there? Yeah, Ryan, good name, by the way. And I think that you're right. It's moving away from it's the whole objective key result office. Don't get Mark triggered on that, because you're going to start talking about objectives and key results.
OKRs.
Yeah, OKRs are definitely a way forward. Okay, so how do we get there? Well, there is a bit of a migration plan that we can think through. We've kind of spoken about it, and you've come up with a few things. The whole idea, remember, is that we need to not be down the bottom doing command and control. We need to be highlighting and partnering with the business to help them think about the strategic goals, to understand them, break them down, bridge that gap from strategy to execution, and do execution in the context of strategy. Okay, so how to do that? Well, you need to understand that context. So step one, form and use key strategic partnerships within the organization. If you are not talking to them all the time, you're becoming the perception filter and becoming less relevant. You need to actually then move away from the old command and control and enable strategic portfolio management, maybe not the right word anymore, but strategic execution. Okay, and then continuously as you were going through, as someone said, reform and transform. To me, it's really about continuously affirm that business value, make sure it's still relevant, help them understand when they're down in the weeds executing what they're doing, help them understand that they're still on track for their own strategy, because then you're adding value. And by doing that, you are going to extend your sphere of influence, where you are that web now, not just that central office I have to go to get a template, but you are the person who is helping them. You become their strategic personal assistant, essentially.
Yeah, and drawing that almost in a roadmap like path, so that you say, this is where we are, this is where we want to be, together partnering with the departments, may be a way of doing that.
Exactly. Yeah. So, Mark, if you're talking about the roadmap, if you go to the next slide, please.
Oh, there you go.
This will be the last slide from me before we finish with Gartner. We're going to move forward with Mark. But if you think of that roadmap, there's two roadmaps we're talking about here. First of all, what you want to really do to get really dynamic is help the organization come up with their strategic roadmap. Not about your roadmap, but their strategic roadmap. And as Mark said, partner with them. They will love the free labor and the people who can help them think about these things, can help them break their ideas down into executable pieces of work. Then there's your roadmap. So your roadmap starts in 2021. This has been the year we've been through. That's why we asked you, have you gone through this year? Well, most organizations started 2021 as being directive. They didn't really understand why they were there. They probably didn't in reality, and they didn't have that business guidance. So that to move from directive forward to adaptive, what you need to do for your next year essentially is form those business partners. Redefine your PMO. Okay, someone in the chat right at the beginning, I think it was Simon, said, go and talk to them about what they actually need. Redefine it to be their assistant and set up that continuous communication. Don't be the watchdog, be the communicator. Yeah. So then for next year, okay, is really moving to be adaptive. If you can do it quicker than a year, that's awesome. Think about then, well, you now want to be an enabler of strategy. Okay, and you want to focus on their vision and their value. So what it means for you is, well, creating a collaborative process and starting to change your systems to actually be adaptive. It's about adaptive project management, focusing not on measuring what came in on a timesheet and a schedule anymore, but on what is the value we need to be tracking and how are we going to track that. And that then gets you to that nirvana. You are now dynamic when you get to the ultimate, where You are trying to capture the value they identify. We need this value, and this is how we are going to use our systems to define that value and then measure it across functional boundaries within the organization. And by this stage, you've forgotten what directive is all about. Hopefully you're not spending a week, a month messing around in spreadsheets anymore. All this is taken care of. What you are doing is helping that organization move forward strategically.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, Ryan, I think the reason why a lot of directive PMOs still exist is because of that administrative overhead of compliance, of ensuring stage gates, of ensuring that you manually consolidate information, right? I think digitalization plays a big path to go into that new direction as well. Yeah.
You need to free yourself. If you want to become adaptive or dynamic, you need to free yourself of the shackles of the mundane. You need to digitalize these and essentially move this down a layer so that you have the headspace to go and partner with the business themselves and work out what they need. We've actually had Caroline's hand up, which is interesting. Caroline?
Sorry, I was just really interested in your comments around the directive. I believe definitely the digitization will stop that directive management. We're, as you know, in the Service Australia, we've been having a lot of issues with just transitioning our projects across. Mm-hmm. And I think with the heads up that it's that whole the SROs wanting to sign off documents, have the paginated reports, have that really all that stuff that is being built in because that's the way we've had to work in the past because we haven't had a digital space. And I just see the future that, as much as we can influence from our space, trying to influence that reporting is a point in time. It's a set of data. It's being real time. It's that constant management of your data. So we shouldn't need to have, we should be more adaptive in that style. So yeah, I just wanted to say that I can see that that's where we're going, and I'm quite excited by this particular slide because I think I can take that back and talk to some of our team and our national manager around where we can potentially start looking going forward. So that's all. I just got all excited. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks, Caroline. And look, as you said it earlier in the text as well, it really is a big cultural change, and we see this from an executive perspective quite often, where they still want to have something tangible in their hand, where that digitalization doesn't end up in their mindset. So it's often not the enabler, so the software or the platform that is the issue. It is actually adopting that, and that's really where that change management comes back into place. As Ryan outlined earlier, change management is huge in anything that we want to indoctrinate into an organization. And I think, what you've just outlined is, I always take the analogy, if 100 years ago we had to go to, I don't know, to a river to wash us, these days we're just going, we don't have to take that time anymore to go to the river. We're just opening up our shower and we can clean ourselves. And I think that's very much the same with the digital transformation right now. Still all manual, lots of Excel spreadsheet, may even the first sort of solutioning coming into place, but still wanting to have, that path to the river or that printable reports. Yeah, it's thank you for the feedback. That's I think that is a common issue across every single organization, and adopting it is often not so much the issue at the at the execution level. It actually is quite often at the leadership level. Interesting. Okay, so, all right, I'm looking at time, Mister. We've got half an hour to go. We don't want to bore the people. Should we continue?
Mark, continue.
All right, thank you. So look, roadmap, and I really want to lead that into the agile path. We didn't want to forget agile. Obviously, agile is a huge component of a PMO these days, and I know that the challenges of bringing waterfall and agile together from a PMO perspective when it comes to governance is actually quite difficult. That's why a lot of organizations refer to them these days as a hybrid PMO, where they have waterfall and agile projects. And if you think about it, ultimately, that's how it needs to go, because we are talking about work, and the way that we manage that work may be different in Department 1 than it is in Department 2. So I didn't want to forget the scaled agile journey. And for those of you who haven't seen SAFE, Scaled Agile Framework, it really is combining agile philosophy with lean philosophy into an environment where everything is customer centric. There are different levels. If you go into the scaledagileFramework.com, they have a wonderful graph that actually outlines the different levels of how you can embed and indoctrinate the agile journey into your organization. Now, as part of that, there is actually a great organization that's called the Agile PMO, and they have been predicting some of those trends that I wanted to capture more from an agile perspective. And I know hybrid and agile, sometimes when you talk about a purist, this can be a little bit difficult. But again, the first thing is, sponsor as the star, obtaining that capital investment and making more out of that, creating that value. And really, this is ultimately what they want to say here with that sponsor as a star, moving it up into this AMP up to agile. And actually, they're talking about the ability, not only from a team's perspective to be an agile team, to work in sprints, but when it comes to the decision making, to approval processes of budgets, to the understanding that you can't directly design and plan and know the outcome in advance to what it is you ultimately accomplish. That AMP up to agile is really that new way where education in that agile platform needs to be part of that 2022 journey. And of course, the tech complexity. Try to minimize your overburdening your staff with even with digital administration. There are great solutions out there that really have the concept of, I'm going to call it, minimal user experience, lots of complexity in the background through automation, through automated consolidation, through notification and automation of approval processes, etc. And then, of course, attracting and retaining top talents. I think, I'm not sure whether you have that issue across the board. I know we definitely have that issue where there is just simply an influx on the need of having talented people working for projects and PMOs. Trying to keep them engaged is really the trend that the Agile PMO outlines for the Agile journey. So I didn't want to forget that, wanted to cover that. If you're interested in the Agile PMO, you can actually look at that on LinkedIn and can subscribe to it. It's super interesting. There are regularly really interesting surveys and blogs out there. The next part that I wanted to cover is really the AIPM. The AIPM, in conjunction with KPMG, has done a project management survey, and I thought it's very interesting. That just was released not even, I think, 2 or 3 weeks ago. We wanted to cover those because there were some really interesting insights. However, before we do some of them, we are going to ask you to fill in a survey. You should actually see on top of you now a form that gives you the ability to commit to that survey. Which success factors do your project meet at least 50% of the time? On time, on budget, in line with the original goals, stakeholder satisfaction, or maybe even none of the above. If you could tell us what is your measurement of success looks like these days, and how you measure them within your own PMO. Okay, let us have a look. There are the first forms. We've got 10 respondents. We've got more people here, so please don't. Yeah, there we go. It's coming in. interesting, in line with the original goal and business intent, is really sort of a leading factor in combination on budget. Of course, money is always, money is important. You can see the results in the chat box, our close race here is really on budget on one hand and in line with the original business goals. Okay, well, let's have a look what APMI and Gartner came up with. Okay, reflecting on the organization's project and program management maturity, I think it's very similar to what we've seen. Interestingly enough, they actually talked more on an individual level, just like we had. That was a little bit different. So again, with the original business intent and on budget as an organization, they didn't see that as being such a big focus, which is an interesting outcome. So as part, by the way, of the collateral that we will send out that survey as well, so that you can reflect on that in your own PMO as well. All right, look, a couple of other things. Success is more than scope, time, and budget. That was really resonating with me and a lot of organizations that are now moving away from this directive PMO into this dynamic PMO. And this one here really outlined, well, thinking about the capabilities that a PMO needs to have, what is sort of the response. And again, we can see, financial management, risk and issue management, always there, which I think is interesting because these are areas that are pockets of industries that are focusing on it. Of course, project planning, benefit management is coming more, and it's really project benefit management. It's an interesting one because benefits are mostly realized after a project is completed. I think we should actually have a benefit realization session next year, Ryan, where we sort of outline that, but it really is value creation, scope, of course. But what I thought was a very big one, of responses, was the procurement and contract management component. So I wonder how deeply the PMO is actually involved in procurement and contract management for projects. That would be an interesting other session that we may want to have. Improving the governance with a PMO. So 108 respondents have answered that. So 77% reported it as being a moderate to very effective way of governance. And as you can see, still over 90%, it is really about performance of reporting. I like to translate that into insights and confident decision making, because the reporting really only shows us a picture and we then have the ability to make that decision. Center of expertise, again, trying to keep our projects on high level, and then quality assurance and review. So I thought that was very interesting, that reporting is of course still one of those main drivers. And if we translate reporting into value creation, maybe that is sort of something we can reflect to in how we want to structure our PMO going forward. Changes increase complexity. Look, I think we all recognize that complexity actually does increase. And the reason why we say that, it's probably not only complexity, but also the speed of change that needs to be incorporated at PMOs. And we saw that over the last couple of years with the emergence of agile. OKRs were already mentioned, objective and key results, really. Not that it's new, but it's a new trend where organizations realize that, well, the strategic goals may not have clear values. How can we come up with values, with objectives, and measure them against key results, so that my initiatives, my projects have that link between key results and therefore having the ability to track strategic goals. And I think that kind of complexity really has increased because there's just more and more methodologies in there. Now, another survey that we would like you to fill in. What is the status of your software development if you then have a project that implements a project portfolio management solution? So for those of you who are online, well, some of them are customers, others are not. This has nothing to do with the software in its own right. It is the digitalization journey of your current PPM solution. So let me have a look. Okay, we've got some respondents. Okay. Interesting. So there are still many close of, still in the early stages of deployment. And I think that has to do also, again, Ryan, looking back at that industry part from that directive into that dynamic where we know we need to start to digitalize it. And we also know how difficult that is. And as we can see, the end result is really 50-50 between still in early stages of deployment and achieved an effective operational state. No one has actually outlined a mature and powerful capability. Interesting.
That's interesting. And I wonder this change as they start moving forward to become more adaptive if they'll reset back to the beginning again.
Yeah. So if we look at that, what the results from AIPM and KPMG were, very similar results when it comes to still in early stages and achieved an effective operational state. But again, look at that, a mature and powerful capability intrinsically implemented in an organization is still only at 10%. Well, that really makes us think, what purpose do I, as a PMO lead, need to fulfill in order to make this really a mature and powerful capability? Because that's where I believe we need to ultimately get to. So yeah, interesting. Again, these are parts that we will share. I'm looking at time, and I do want to evoke a couple of more conversations here, so I'll keep on running project management and collaborating software, the successful adoption of agile. So this really moves now more into that agile methodology or hybrid methodology. Interestingly enough, in individual responses, over 70% said, yeah, we moved actually quite well into that methodology of agile. But organizational wide, it is still behind. And I actually think it truly has to do with the mindset, what Caroline was mentioning earlier as well. Executive managers still want to know, hey, what do I get for my money? You ask me for a budget, what are the deliverables? And in the agile world, not that we can't do that, of course we can, but of course, it's almost like a wave. It flows and it changes. I always like to say that agile is a team-focused project execution, whereby waterfall is a project-centric execution component. So so I thought that was very interesting. The main concerns for the organization who do adopt methodology is actually driving leadership commitment. Exactly what we were talking about, shifting the mindset of actually tracking value. Budget is the cost that makes me invest to achieve that value. That's really that value we were talking about. Just sort of a summary page. Again, we'll send that through. There are some interesting stats. How do project professionals see their role in the organization? Well, that may be a little bit biased because these are professional project managers who have been asked here. But again, of course, project management skills will be more important in the future. And I think we all realize that because everybody in an organization actually conducts work and as such also does projects. The big question is, what's the difference between a professional project manager needing to manage a high-profile dedicated project management project in comparison to what kind of smaller or medium project can I manage as an individual or as a team without necessarily needing to be, hand-shackled throughout these complex processes. So really trying to cover all project management maturity in a PMO, I think is actually a very aspirational goal to have, because ultimately the information we want to provide needs to be complete, not just CapEx, not just high level, projects over, $1 million, but actually how is work conducted. So I encourage you to check those out. Training and accreditation was there. Satisfaction with the investment being made from an organization as well as from an individual point of view. There's some really, really interesting stats that we can reflect on for our 2022 path. I do like this very much because it is all talking about digitalization and robotics. try that with your AI robot when he starts working for you to see whether he gets that. So trying to move away from an operational, adaptive and strategic PMO, again, just outlines really trying to reduce the administration through automation. Technology is there these days, not just Microsoft. Everybody is going down that path of trying to automate mundane tasks, trying to actually advance knowledge and advance decision making through that automation, which will then lead us more into that transformational component where we can quickly adapt to new situations and track them and measure them on a high value perspective, all the way to the strategic PMO, where we ultimately want to ensure that we are the custodians of the execution of the strategy of the organization. So I thought that sort of concludes it nicely. We thought a couple of suggestions on how you could actually do that is ultimately the underlining message here is we need to be able to create value. Value can come in many different ways in an organization, depending on what the purpose of the organization is. Non-for-profit, of course, has different values than a profit organization. A government has different values to a one-man show. So we really need to determine those value creations. And what the way that we actually approach that, where we want to evoke thinking for key stakeholders, is really on those different levels, starting with strategy, then portfolio and project. Then we apply the why, the how, and the what. Really, ultimately, why are we wanting to, as a PMO, go into this strategic glue between execution and planning? Well, as an executive, I want to make sure that my organization stays sustainable. I want to make sure that they are future-proofed. I want to make sure that there's successful business growth and a clear messaging of of strategic goals into the work environment. How can we accomplish that? For example, through prioritization, through confident decision making, and then really the what. The what is then ultimately the mechanics of how we are tracking that information, either manually or automated. Just a couple of thinkers and suggestions that we actually do internally when we ask ourselves, hey, what kind of intrinsic value does portfolio management mean? What does a portfolio manager needs to do, or what does a departmental head requires? Again, the emotional side of it, they require certainty. They need to be able to have trustworthy insights, and they need to be able to create values. The why, the how, and the what approach is what we apply, and we do this on all levels, just as a way for you to think about how you could transition from that transactional PMO into that dynamic PMO. That would make a lot of sense. Now we have another 15 minutes. Hey, this is awesome. We actually went through our slides. That also allows us to actually open up the mic. Again, the main takeaways for this session was really move away from the transactional into the adaptive and strategic project management capability, because this is where the value actually is created. Understand the key results of the organization. This was mentioned a few times now, especially if you do not have a direct correlation between the strategic goal measure and the project outcome measure. Think about how you can glue them together, and this is where key results, objectives and key results fit in very nicely. Engage with your key stakeholders. Make sure that you create a partnership with the different departments that you service, because ultimately they are your customer. And unfortunately, even we at Sensei do not have that magic key that allows me to click and turn around and everything is magically working. Try to create that roadmap, that reality roadmap, so that you can also communicate, where am I now? How do I create value? Where do I want to be, let's say, at the end of 2022? And hopefully in 12 months' time, we will have a similar session again, and you can tell us your roadmap and your journey. I'm going
to kick off with a question for the group.
Yeah, yes, please.
It's about engaging with stakeholders. This is key. Okay, then we'll go to Simon. Do you think that the people you are working with can actually engage with the stakeholders? I'm pretty certain if you go to someone, or there are people in the organization with this built up vision in them, this passion, and they just want someone to support them, it'll come bubbling out. But do people have the ability to actually go and help them bring it out? So that's my kind of question.
Yeah, and look, I mean, from a PMO, I'm just going to call it from a PMO management perspective. Well, how much exposure do you have to executives? They are ultimately really your customer base because they want to know what's going on. How do you deal with communication to the executive level? If you don't mind sharing. Or don't, are there anyone who do not? Okay, well, let's do a mini survey. You can actually, in Teams, you can applause anybody who doesn't communicate with the executive management from a PMO perspective. Let's put the claps into the hand. This one here. Okay, there are some. That's interesting. And I think it has to do with the size of the organization as well. You know, the communication layer, trying to get that partnership can be very, very individual. I get that here. So, okay, then let's do the other side. Who is actually communicating with their executives on a PMO level? Give me a clap first, and then I'll get to you, Jim. Oh, right. We've got a couple of them as well, which is really good. So you really have that channel into your, executive leadership to bring them on that journey of the partnership. Jim.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Ryan, for the presentation and your reflections. I actually want to reflect on key words I have heard so far. Mm-hmm. One of them is value. Okay, so value creation, that has been mentioned a lot. Yes. And then the leadership, and then the culture, and the change, these few key words. Yeah. I used to be part of a PMO function, and then I moved on to change management. And I feel having a intention to define value is very, very essential, but it's not good enough because even you have, not to say most of the times, the values were not clearly defined. Yeah. And so even you have a very clearly defined values, what matters most to me is the ownership within the organization in terms of value realization or benefit realization. Yeah. And so the change management comes to the party, definitely. However, it definitely needs a governance. There is a performance-related element of measuring that as well. So I wondered whether I can share this, my thinking and my reflection, but I wondered whether other participants and yourselves as well, Mark and Ryan, where do you see change management sits in this whole picture of the renewed mission and renewed task of PMO?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll open it up to the rest of the audience, and I wonder whether there is some feedback from the rest of the audience. They're all very shy, Jim. Have you noticed that? It's interesting. I hope they're still there. It's really hard if you're not in the same room. Look, from my point of view, value creation can only occur once the value is in the hand of the resource ultimately. Change management is actually part of the effort that it takes to create the value. Because it's great that I can build a space shuttle, but if no one knows how to fly it, well, then that's not a value. Then it's just a cost. As part of implementing and determining the value that you want to implement, in my view, needs to very, very deeply and intrinsically incorporate change management, because it may mean adopting to new ways. It may mean tracking new values. So trying to embed that into an organization from a change management point of view is vital. It is one of the main reasons why projects are actually not successfully implemented, because the underestimating component of change. Yeah, so that would be my take on that.
Mark, I'm going to take it one step further in that if we think of future PMOs or SROs or strategic officers needing to be really dynamic and adaptive, they need constant feedback on the change. So it's about a constant stream of smaller change initiatives bringing value as opposed to a small number of year-long projects. So it's not even project delivery then change anymore. It's project and change happening in a yin and a yang together, constantly spinning around.
Yes. And I think it's a very interesting concept, Ryan, because projects used to be, you have a start and an end, and once you finished, and that's it, and I move on to the next project. We actually internally, we realized that, and we actually now have a phase, a post-project phase that we call nurture and strive. And that nurture and strive is anticipating exactly that. The embedding of what we've delivered, what value we delivered, the feedback that we get from the resources to incorporate what we refer to as 100% user adoption. So that really is embedding that change management component almost as a second, or as a last phase where we continuously then nurture and strive. And as you said, Ryan, it really is that feedback loop and continuous improvement. And Jim, I think that also sort of outlined when you mentioned benefit realization. It's great that I can realize the benefit, but can I sustain that is the question, right? All right,
Mark, we have one other thing. I wouldn't mind adding one other comment if that's okay.
Yeah.
I often think that as delivery people, we've got a really good understanding of the bricks and mortar of projects and what execution of projects is. And most of us transition through that and then get excited about PMOs. But when we talk about this subject and we talk about what a PMO is and why they fail and why they succeed, I often wonder if we shouldn't run the PMO as a project. I often ask myself, should we not have a clear view with a sponsor and a benefits plan and a delivery time frame? Not to say it can have a fixed ending time, but we don't manage it like we would a project. We don't look at the change management like you've just described. And that's why I put the comment in at the beginning of the chat to talk about find out what it is people want from the PMO, because as soon as you do that, as soon as you ask them what is the outcome, what will success look like, it will require executive investment. Okay, you want to achieve that? If I do this, you'll need to lead this conversation or open these doors or provide this funding or, accept these risks. And I continually come back to that question personally about when you run a PMO, think about what you're asking projects to do and take the applicable bits and apply it to your running of the PMO. Just a thought.
Yeah, it's an interesting component. I always like to compare a PMO to a finance department in many ways, where you are involved in every single department trying to get the numbers, of course, when it comes to finance. But they are a strategic part of the business. And look, you wouldn't want everybody in a department to run their own, their own invoicing system or their own invoicing process, because you wouldn't find it being easily consolidated. Spinning this a little bit further, Simon, it would probably be good to have that, I'm going to call it center of excellence. It may not be the right path, where the PMO ultimately takes those values that you are referring to and is then ultimately also in charge of delivering them, right? It's definitely a very, very interesting thought. Is the PMO almost an outdated function in its classical term, right?
I think that the bit about the PMO running as a project is it asks the question, what are we here to do? And I'd never disagree with the information being provided around moving from a directive to an adaptive organisation, but it fails to understand that a lot of the parts of the organisation that need to move won't understand what those terms are, and in fact will have a 180-degree reverse view of what they actually want. So as a PMO, and you think about it as a service and discretionary investment and a sponsor, you go back and say, well, you tell us what it is you want. It doesn't mean you don't provide recommendations. This is the way to go. But it bridges that change gap about, okay, you still want the directive reports? We'll do that. And this is the consequence. And we can come back and look at it in 6 months and reevaluate. But it really, as a service, puts pressure on the business to say, what is it that you want from a PMO? And I think a lot of the failure scenarios are about that active conversation being missing and assumptions being made about, well, this is what a business needs and therefore we'll drive for that. Whereas it might be the right outcome, but if you don't take the business on the journey and they're not asking for it, they'll tell you where to go pretty quickly.
Simon, I couldn't agree more. That's why I actually put up this. This is just an example that the way that SAFE manages that, where it is essentially very much a team-centric approach, where all levels always work towards that. I'm going to call it left to right approach, where that central hub that we have these days in the PMO may actually not be part of that, but is actually intrinsically involved in all of those different departments as their subject matter expert, ensuring that that the value that the department is planning to do, that they achieve that. So I wonder how the PMO will evolve over the next 10 years. I've seen the last 20 years, there wasn't a big change, but I also truly believe that we are in a revolution of how we are actually trying to deliver value. And suddenly we recognize that project really is only a puzzle piece, or a program or portfolio. These are only really frames of work we need to conduct. Maybe there's a different way of conducting that kind of work. Yeah. I'm sorry, it is 2 minutes out and I was just being kicked under the table. Thank you, Alice. To outline, obviously we've gone through a couple of questions and we still have quite a few questions here. Before we just revisit some of them for the last 2 minutes, I just want to point out that, of course, the information that you will get will be sent out by us. So next step, and of course the recording here will be sent out as well. Please follow the link if you have any kind of questions that you would like to pose. We always answer them, obviously, in the next session. And yeah, please connect with us through LinkedIn so that that you don't lose out on one of these great sessions as we had today. I think there were really good discussions around the roadmap of 2022. It'll be interesting to see where we are in 12 months' time. Well, with that, last opportunity for the last minute to open up for any other questions. Awesome.
If not, great. Have a great Christmas.
Thank you very much. Have an awesome Friday. Merry Christmas to all of you. And we shall see you in the next year, early next year.
Thank you and Merry Christmas.
Take care. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks all.
Bye. Merry Christmas.
Yeah, you too.